Hello, welcome back to Inside the Data here on Inside the Birds. Geoff Mosher alongside our analytics expert, Sam Finkel, and we're continuing our series looking at NFL Draft, 2025 NFL Draft prospects, position by position group. We are going to do interior offensive linemen in this position, and what we do is have Sam explain his scatter charts that measure the prospects' athleticism and production, see where that falls on the chart. We compare them to past first rounders, past top 100 picks, and then compare them to all interior offensive linemen who have been drafted over the last 4 years to get an idea of how these guys measure up. As we always like to say, Sam, it's not a be all to end all. It's not an exact science. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. Certain stats can skew something one way or another, but there is a lot of information to be gleaned here. And as we said it when we talked about tackles, athleticism and measurables are as utmost important for these positions as they are for any.
Yeah. And not to be too much of a spoiler for this class, but it's a very interesting guard class. There's not a lot of, I don't think there's a lot of really high end, slam dunk guys, but there's not a lot of low end guys. It's a very balanced class.
Very
as you'll see throughout this.
So this is the one position that we're going to look at where you have guys who play different spots, and at the end we'll talk about which guys we think or what the data says projects to maybe playing guard, and which one or who played guard, who played center, and how that might translate to the NFL. I do want to remind everybody that we are putting these charts. If you're a listener, a podcast listener, but you want the visual, we are putting these charts up on InsideTheBirds.com. Sam has done a great job with these color codings that explain everything, and it's very user-friendly and reader-friendly, in my opinion, when you look at it on InsideTheBirds.com. So don't be afraid to go over there and check them out. What stood out to you about the guard class, Sam?
Yeah, I think the first thing,
what you just said, yeah.
But I also would say that, again, we had it. So the combination of guard and center was actually out of necessity, right? So I did separate guards and centers originally when I was doing this analysis, but there just wasn't enough volume to really tell a complete story. So you kind of have to bear with the fact that some of these guys are centers or played center, and some of them played guard. And you do see, a lot of guards or centers playing guard in the NFL, or vice versa. More so, I'd say center playing guard than guard playing center, just because obviously center is just such a different position.
Right.
But I think it gives with that caveat in mind, it gives a good idea of these guys' talent comparatively to each other and to the last 4 years of data.
Got it. So I want you to explain again the green lines. And well, first I'll say the horizontal line measures an prospect's athleticism. The vertical line measures their production in college. Where they intersect becomes the average. So the first chart, the green chart, Sam, reflects what again?
Yeah, so that's first round guards. And it's interesting to say that because they're really, and center, sorry, let's be but it's more guards at that. Right. I'm just going to call them interior offensive line. Just to keep it safe, but we're really talking about guards and centers here. And there really isn't that many.
Yeah, I've drawn two conclusions from your scatter chart, Sam, that probably not the strongest guard center. I mean, sometimes you see guys, I think last year, a couple of guys went in the top 50, right? Like the Jackson Powers guy. And there was another really good guard or center who I'm not thinking of, who I think went pretty early. But you don't see a ton of centers or guards drafted in the first round. They're usually second and third rounders. So I don't want people to be scared off by this chart, but it's clear that, from an athleticism and a production standpoint, doesn't appear that anybody's worth being drafted in the first round, as there are nobody in the upper right quadrant for blue chips and nobody in the lower right quadrant for safe.
Yeah, but like I said, these guys are really good value later in the draft, and there's really, you can't go wrong with most of them.
Right, and I would say the second thing that stands out is you got 4 guys here that, compared to past first rounders, test really well athletically. Jared Wilson, TateRatledge, Dylan Fairchild, and Jackson Slater. And Drew Kendall's above average athletic testing as well. So that speaks to maybe your point on the later rounds getting some real gems.
So here's the thing that's interesting about those, 5 guys you mentioned. What do you want to guess something about what 3 of them have in common? I can give you a hint.
They play in the SEC? I don't know.
Oh, they do play in the SEC, but they all play for one school in particular in the SEC.
Okay. Are they all Alabama or Georgia players?
They're Georgia players.
There you go. So this just became an Eagles. This became an Eagles-centric look at interior offensive line. All right, interesting. That's good.
I thought that was worth sharing.
Yeah. And now that I think about it, I would like you to read, if you have, who are the centers and guards who've been drafted in the first round over the last 4 years? Because
sure,
the ones I was thinking of were not first. Like Powers Johnson, I don't think was a first rounder. I know Zach Frazier from the Steelers, I believe, was a second or a third
rounder. Yeah,
he was good. He's really good.
So last year in the first round, Graham Barton, which is interesting because he projected as tackle guard, like he could play really anywhere.
Right.
But based on the actual NFL combine data and draft profile, it had him in guard. So that's why he was there. And then the 2023 draft, second round only, and that was Tippmann was the first one out of Wisconsin.
Wait, there was another center in that draft, because I liked Tippmann, even though there was another center I thought getting more attention.
About a couple picks later, John Michael Schmitz.
That's the one, yes, and I liked Tippmann better. I thought, for some reason, Schmidt might have gone higher, but yeah. He definitely got more pre-draft hype than Tippmann going into it.
He 100% did. I remember that as well.
He was enormous.
Yeah. And unfortunately, he is with the Giants. So
yeah. But I don't think he played all that. I mean, he's okay. He's serviceable.
Yeah. But he, like we talked about in our last video, he's some clay.
Yeah.
You're gonna shape him up.
By the way, TateRatledge from Alabama or Georgia, I mean, right?
Yes.
What's that, a 98 athletic score?
It was definitely something up there for sure.
Yeah, that's pretty darn good right there.
Yeah, you can't do much better than that, to be honest.
No. So we, as you like to do, you put Eagles interior offensive linemen in to compare to past first rounders. And hey, look at Landon Dickerson, who was a first round talent. Obviously not the greatest athletic tester, but a very productive player in college. The injuries, the 4 surgeries he wound up having before he was drafted is a reason he was a second rounder and not a first.
And another thing that you should point out with Dickerson especially is some fallibility in these charts a little bit, right? Because you can't look at Dickerson's Super Bowl performance, especially when he did that spin, and say that he is not an above average athlete. Right. Just because he didn't test necessarily as where this line is doesn't mean he isn't an above average athlete.
Right. I'm surprised to see Kenyon Green, who was a first round pick of the Texans and now was traded to the Eagles this offseason, not really as good of an athlete as you would have thought for a guy drafted in the first round.
Yeah, I was also a little bit surprised.
I mean, his score is 59.
I believe that is, yes.
Yeah, that's surprising because, again, to be a first round interior offensive lineman, usually the first thing they're looking at is your power, your athleticism. I mean, he was clearly just a very productive player and really fundamentally sound in college, which enabled him to be a first-round pick. Because that wasn't like a reach. He was considered the best guard of the draft by far.
Yeah, he was an 80 in production and a 60 in athleticism.
60, wow.
Yeah, and if you look at his numbers already, 6'4", 323, 34, 34 and 1/8 arm, 10 and 3/8 hand, 5'2", 40-yard dash. The 10-yard split was 1.8, 26-inch vert, 8 foot 6 inch broad, and a 5.12 shuffle and 20 bench press.
Wow.
So, but comparatively to other guards, it didn't necessarily, match up.
Right. How about no surprise, Cam Jurgens right about 90 in athletic testing, because that's what really appealed to the Eagles. Now, as a center in college who only played center, I think 1 or 2 years. Obviously, you don't see him on the high in the production element, but way above average for athletic testing at 90.
Yeah, I think, speaking of that, McMahon is an interesting guy to bring up here, because he's basically right on the average first round athleticism.
Yep. Well, he kind of should be, because he's really undersized. So you would think he can run and has quickness,
Sure.
Short shuttle, good movement. I mean, that the Rams claimed him as soon as the Eagles waived him. So, but he's small. He's just really small. But that's going to be the case, right? Cam Jurgens a little bit undersized, but obviously that's why the athletic testing is what it is.
Yep.
And then you see Trevor Keegan just a little bit under the average for athleticism, and Tyler Steen a little bit further under average. But this is, again, compared to first rounders, and Steen's a third rounder and Keegan was a sixth rounder, I believe.
Yeah, I think you're right on that.
All right. So we'll see how that changes when the lens changes. And now we'll look at the interior offensive line class this year's class compared to now top 100 picks, which is generally the first 3 rounds. And there you see a guy like Jared Wilson now moves into that upper right quadrant. That makes you feel better if you take this guy in the second or third round, Sam. And then a bunch of guys here who the line got a little closer to, like those guys that we talked about from Georgia. Now all of a sudden you're feeling pretty safe in the second or third round with them.
Not just safe, you're feeling ecstatic.
Really good,
yeah. But I think this shift has been really friendly to this class. I mean, almost everybody is in outside of that bottom left quadrant, and it's only going to get better. Spoiler again. I should spoiler warning next time, but yeah, there you go.
Nice. I like it. Yeah, you're right, because there's unlike past scatter charts where we've seen some guys hovering in that, not just in that lower left quadrant, but in the lower left part of the lower left quadrant. There's really nobody around there.
Yeah, I think that's just a testament to this particular class.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of good value in the guards. If you don't reach and take them in the first round, which I don't think any of them, maybe one will slip in there, but I don't think so.
Right. Miles Frazier, this was a kind shift for him too. This is another LSU kid, correct?
Yes, he is.
Yeah, who now becomes an above average athletic tester compared to top 3, top 100 picks, Drew Kendall as well, and Connor Colby. Interesting stuff. Let's look at the same chart with Eagles now placed in. You got to like Keegan now getting closer to the average, because Keegan was a day 3 pick, and now we're comparing him to, first, second, and third rounders. He's right there at the athletic average.
But look who this line was the kindest to.
Yeah, Kenyon Green, but more so from a production standpoint. So he's now safe because he was compared to, again, top 100 picks. Yes, more productive. But you would expect that because he was a first round pick.
Right. You would kind of hope he would have been, on this at least the bottom right quadrant in the first round line.
Mm-hmm.
But again, he's a guy that has a high floor. He's a guy, and I think that is kind of what, maybe not what the Texans saw in him, but I think that's kind of what the Eagles saw is he has a really good baseline. You can develop a little bit. He's not necessarily going to win everything on purely athleticism. And he struggled a little bit in the fundamentals in the NFL. But he has, precedent of him succeeding on the fundamentals. So it's not that much of, it's not that crazy to say that he could regain that edge.
Yeah. Like if they can get him to play at third round pick level, which is what they're expecting of Tyler Steen, who is a third round pick, then you've won. You've won the deal because you didn't draft him in the first round. You made a trade for him, right? So
that's
you didn't trade a first round pick for him either. So yeah, there's potential there. All right, let's move on to the red line charts. This represents what now?
All drafted interior offensive linemen.
And when you look at that, 90% of this interior offensive line class, Sam, you'd feel safe taking, beyond the first round, because you've got a bunch of guys in blue. All those Georgia guys now are blue chippers. If you get them in the third, fourth, fifth round, something like that, bunch of gems, bunch of safe picks in the bottom right. And even the 2 quote unquote lower left bust quadrants, Jake Majors and Joe Huber, they're not far off from an athleticism standpoint
at all. And I think there's justification to drafting every single one of these interior offensive linemen.
Yeah, I would think that they all get picked. Again, given the sad state of offensive line play in the league, if you're a good athlete, even if you're not the most productive guy, if you're a good athlete, they'll figure out a way to get you into a camp at least.
Yep.
All right. And then for the last one, it's the same chart, but with all the Eagles in. And yeah, Kenyon Green continues to look much better. Landon Dickerson obviously stays there. Keegan now over the line for athleticism. So Keegan, who they got on day 3, is a better athletic tester than most guys who are going to go in the draft. Same with, of course, Juergens. And Steen not too far off.
I want to be like super clear about Steen too. Steen was rated as a tackle coming out of the draft. And so naturally his production level is going to be lower just by virtue of playing tackle, right? I mean, as we discussed in the tackle video, on the outside, you're expected to have worse stats typically.
Right.
And his size and athleticism factor into it, and from a tackle lens. So I think it's really important to understand that just because Steen is still in this, even though he's fringe, he's in this bottom left quadrant, does not mean as a guard he would be in this bottom left quadrant.
Great point. I mean, if he added like 10 points to his score on production to account for that tackle to guard switch, and he was more like a 71, you're looking at a guy who's right at that average for anybody who's drafted, and that's pretty good.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Good stuff there. So let's take a look at some of these guys, like zero in on them a little bit to get positional understanding of them. The gems that we have are the 3 Georgia guys: Jared Wilson, TateRatledge, and Dylan Fairchild. No surprise at all. Really nice sack rates, nice pressure rates, and the one of those 3 that is the center is Jared Wilson, because he played center at Georgia, correct?
Yep. Right. And here's the thing: I know people watching on YouTube. I'm sorry I didn't color code it. I didn't think it'd be fair to color code this one because there's 2 positions. And I just don't think you can compare. I think you have to look at these guys as individual prospects and not necessarily position to position. And I just thought it was the best way to do it to not color code it. So sorry in advance that is not color coded.
We're going to get canceled now.
I know it's over.
You might as well not do any of the other positions.
I know it was a good run. I appreciate it. Thank you guys.
The one thing that stands out about the Georgia guys is Wilson. I guess he only played 1 year of center, right? Because he only has 593 snaps compared to Ratledge's 1177 and Fairchild's 838. So his numbers might be a little bit different as far as pressures allowed because he played fewer snaps than the other 2.
Yeah. So again, like these are cumulative volume stats, right? You expect somebody who plays a lot more to allow more pressure, just naturally by virtue of football. Right. That's just how it works.
Right.
And actually, if you don't, then you're an incredible prospect. So.
And also worth mentioning that like a lot of these centers have really low, for example, Ohio State, Seth McLaughlin, really low sack rate. Well, you're a center. So you're usually you're double teaming and with the guard, right? So you get you're helped or giving help.
Right. And that's an important statistic for sure. And that's why tackles, what we were saying, have the most, because you have the least amount of help.
Right.
The more closer you get to the center, as the center, you have theoretically the most help. And it should reflect that in your statistics.
So I remember us mentioning Jake Majors as someone who, once you widen the lens to top 100, all drafted interior offensive linemen, looks a little better. And, he's got 1,564 pass snaps. So this is a guy who has a lot of experience playing at Texas, which has been a really good team for the last few years at center. So that's another reason when you look at him and say, this guy will be with a team. He'll be in a camp because you're finding a center who has many years of experience at center.
Yeah. And it seems like if you look at them, he has obviously the most at center by a decent amount too. Next closest guy is Drew Kendall from Boston College. So experience at the position is important, and it should be valued in this draft.
Yep. Drew Kendall looks like a pretty nice center prospect. If you need an interior, centers get a little bit of an extra look because sometimes you just need a guy who can snap the ball as opposed to a guard who may not have that position. who have not had experience doing that.
Right. And that's, I think, at the beginning of the video, why I think it's important to know that most of the time it's like a center to guard transition rather than guard to center because of that particular skill set being so different.
Right. Well, a very interesting class of interior offensive linemen. I just think in general, after doing offensive tackles and here interior offensive linemen, it's going to be an interesting draft for O-linemen in general. And there are some really good athletes.
Absolutely.
All right. That's good stuff. That's going to do it for another episode of Inside the Data here. Alongside Sam Finkel, I'm Geoff Mosher. Thanks all for watching.